Hello Year 11 and welcome to the second video for the Walking Talking mock going through the GCSE English Language Paper 2 Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives from November 2018. In this video I'm going to talk you through the approach to question 2, the synthesis question. I'm going to talk you through the annotations that I would make and my thinking about this question, and like last time I will give you a structure to respond, and then I will write the first part of an answer with opportunities for you throughout to pause and have a go at your own work. Now in this exam, this question, you can allot about 12 minutes to. Obviously this video is going to be a lot longer than that because I'm talking you through the approach and I'm talking you through my thinking as I'm answering this question. As you practice this question more, you will get a lot quicker at it. So don't worry that the video is quite long and then I'm telling you to only spend 12 minutes on it in the exam. So the reason for doing question 1, then question 3, skipping out question 2, is that in the actual exam, that is what we would advise you to do. Tackle question 1 first, get your easy 4 marks, then move on to question 3, remembering both of those questions only require you to refer to one text. Then you can move back to question 2, by which point you're already familiar with both sources, you already know what they're about, you've already started to do some work with them, which should make question 2 much more straightforward, as you need to refer to both sources in this question. You will always need to refer to both sources in this question. As with any of your questions, the first thing you should be doing is reading that question really clearly, really carefully. So it will state you need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Now, if you only refer to one source, then you cannot get a mark that is above 4 in this question. You must refer to both sources to get a mark that is 5 out of 8 or above. You should also try to deal with each source in a balanced way. So it will remind you of a way that the sources are linked. So remember, our sources for this question, for this paper, are both about cyclists and their experiences on the road, their experiences with drivers. So it says here, both sources describe the similar ways in which drivers behave. So at this point, I would highlight that key phrase to really log it in my mind that that's what I'm being asked to think about here. Then it will make it even more specific about exactly what your summary has to be about. So it says use details from both sources to write a summary of what you understand about the similar behaviour of the drivers. Key word here, details. When you annotate, you are looking for details, facts, things. You are not looking for language devices. This is not a language analysis question. It instructs you to write a summary. But as you should know, the key here is not really summarizing, it's synthesizing, which is not quite the same thing. And the key thing that you have to include is inference. So really, we're not summarizing. We're writing a synthesis, and we are including inference, because that's the key skill here to get you the marks. Now, what are we writing details about, or what are we finding details about? What we understand about the similar behaviour of the drivers. That has to be your focus. If you write about things that are not about the behaviour of the drivers, again, you are limiting the marks that you can get. You have to address the correct focus of the question to get a mark of 5 or above. Now, this question could ask for similarities, it could ask for differences. In practice, write about either. if the question asks for similarities, but you also include some differences, but you have explained yourself clearly with inferences, you will get credited for it. If it asks for differences and you write about similarities, you will still get credit for that. It's about the quality of your inference, not whether you've done similarities or differences, really. So knowing that our focus is the behaviour of the drivers, your approach should be to skim back over both articles and highlight the details where we are told something about the behaviour of the drivers. Now, this could be their actions, it could be their behaviour towards other road users, it could be their motivations for their behaviour. In each article, there's discussion of the sense of responsibility or lack thereof that they show. Both of them make mention of the consequences of behaviour, and you could also get some details about how common this sort of behaviour is. There's lots that you can pick out. So I'm going to go through and annotate this one, and then I'll do source B as well. And then, like before, I'll think about how I could start my answer using the details I've found, and you can have a go at finishing off that response. So, things I have to account on this of terrifying or alarming incidents. There's nothing specifically about the drivers there. A driver decided to overtake my bike very closely and at speed is clearly behaviour of a driver. The driver was gambling on the assumption, so that suggests they're being quite risky. So that's their behaviour, that's a detail about their behaviour. In this third paragraph, it talks about the sort of the consequences of that behaviour. Here's relatively minor roll of the dice with my chances being for nothing. So the fact that they do this risky behaviour and it's meaningless. Could also have that's appallingly common, suggests there's a lot of this behaviour around. There's nothing really about drivers' behaviour in that next paragraph. Now, this fifth paragraph is where we start to get some interesting nuance to this article, where it talks about how it's not really just about drivers, it's more about people. So this detail about the behaviour of the drivers could be where you start to pick up some points for a perceptive response. So the thing to grasp is it's not about the person. It's about the person, sorry. That suggests that it's not necessarily drivers' behaviour, it's just people's behaviour. And you could use the roughly similar proportions of idiots there to back up an idea. Then we have in this paragraph how the consequences of risky behaviour as a driver are very damaging. Chance they could kill another human being. Not about morals, seems like a relevant detail. Now this next paragraph talks about how drivers and irresponsible drivers tend to get away with things. And it also suggests that drivers do have a responsibility to look out for people, so that's about their behaviour. Moving on to the next part of the source. In this paragraph, we have the suggestion that drivers squeeze past bicycles. And this suggests that drivers should take more responsibility for their driving. And how drivers put cyclists at risk. So we've got ideas there about responsibility. We've got ideas about people taking risks, whether they are calculated or not. We've also got some ideas about the consequences of risky behaviour. So those are the sorts of things that we might try to find links with in the next article. So now again, we're looking through this and we're finding details about the driver's behaviour. Now, this suggests that the drivers of the hansom cabs have developed a new sport that suggests they're enjoying this kind of behaviour. And that sport is chasing the lady who rides her bicycle. Giving him several exciting runs suggests that they're enjoying this behaviour. If he'd not tried to kill me suggests that these taxi drivers are doing this very much on purpose. Now, this is the paragraph that we focused on for our language analysis question. So we've got this language here about the drivers being like the greyhounds, but it's not really a detail about their behaviour specifically. This paragraph is a little more obtuse about the behaviour of the drivers. So here we get back to thinking about specifically the drivers of the hansoms. So drivers of hansoms have various ways of inflicting torture on a fellow creature. They loudly shout hi, so this suggests they're just being quite obnoxious, really. They share your handlebars and wheels, suggesting they get really close. Serious grief suggests that they are taking a risk of causing harm to cyclists. Fond of cutting in, just in front of you. Deliberately checking you at a crossroads. So all of these phrases suggest that their behaviour is much more malicious than in the first article. The first article said it wasn't a question of morals, it was a question of physics. And it also talked about, in the specific incident, that someone's made a calculated risk. This seems like they're doing it for fun. They're causing her distress for fun, which is very different. And then on to the last paragraph. This talks more about this incident. Stuck between a bus and a horse. Now this mentions how this driver is more considerate. So where we have, indeed, on one occasion, I might have been killed, but for the consideration of a driver, that seems like a good link with the behaviour in the first article, where it's suggesting that it's not about drivers, it's not about drivers of cars, it's about people. So in both, we have some drivers who are risky and want to cause harm to people, and some drivers who are considerate. So there's lots of things that we can make links with. Now, having found these details, you then want to start thinking, well, how are you going to organise your response to this question so that you are making clear comparisons, clear links between the similarities, and also clear inferences. So having found details in each source, now you want to start thinking about, well, now you want to write up your answer. Now, you don't really have time to plan your response here. You've got 8 marks for this question. You're spending 10 minutes on it. So I wouldn't suggest doing a detailed plan. You might, however, just jot down some quick areas that you're going to talk about. So in both, obviously, we've got risky behaviour. But I think maybe where there's a difference is in the motivation that they have. So that's perhaps where we could, a kind of mini thesis statement for this question, that in both articles we can see risky behaviour from the drivers, however, where they start to differ is in the motivation. So then how do you want to set out or organise, structure your response? Well, I would advise starting with an overview. Now this only needs to be a sentence or so. Oh, that's the overview. So to say generally how they are similar and possibly how they are different. Then you want to follow this pattern. SQI. Make a statement about each source. Well, start with source A. A statement about source A. Then quote a detail. And then develop some inference about that detail. This is where you're getting most of your marks from. Then you need to repeat that for source B. So how is it similar? How is it different? Now that would be one, or should be one, developed point of similarity or difference. You want to do all of that twice. So you're aiming for 2 thoughtfully developed points of similarity or difference. Remember, whatever it says up here, if you do similarities or you do differences, you will be credited for them the same as long as they are valid. Make sure that you're writing your statements in a clear way. Make sure that your quotes are about details about the behaviour of the drivers and that you are inferring something from that detail, not doing language analysis. Anything that's language analysis is not going to get you marks here. So as I was highlighting the details, I was speaking about my thoughts about those details, and hopefully you picked up that generally I think that there is risky behaviour in both of these articles. However, in source A, it's almost like a calculated risk. They're just doing it to get ahead a little bit. They are gambling, but it's almost like they're doing it in a responsible way, almost in comparison to the behaviour of the drivers in source B, where they are intentionally harassing this woman. Their behaviour is risky, and it also seems to be quite malicious. What might be a sensible point of comparison for your second point of comparison might be the idea of how it's actually not behaviour of drivers, it's behaviour of people. And in source A, it suggests that all people, whether they're drivers or not, have the capacity to be irresponsible. It's just that when you're a driver, your risky behaviour can result in somebody's death, and you are in a cocoon of metal, whereas other road users are more vulnerable. In source B, we do have that one considerate driver who helps her when she's stuck between a bus and a horse, an omnibus and a horse, but the rest of them seem to be doing it for fun. At this point, you may wish to pause the video and write up your own response to question 2, or you can carry on watching and I'll talk you through how I would start my response and then you can finish it off. Okay, so as I said, it's a good idea to start with an overview statement, and here's what I've come up with. In both sources, drivers behave in irresponsible ways, so I'm showing what that similarity is. However, while in source A, this represents calculated risk, the drivers in source B, that should be, seem maliciously reckless. So in my overview statement, I'm showing that I understand the similarity, but also where it starts to get a bit more nuanced, where I can start to pick it apart a bit more to develop a perceptive response. Change that to B. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of this reckless behaviour. I'm going to go on to compare reckless behaviour in each source as one of my main points. The driver in source A who decided to overtake shows behaviour which is irresponsible, but rational. He makes an assessment of the risk. Passing very closely and at speed. I think you get the sense that this is something they do a lot. I'm going to say, which implies they're used to this kind of driving. It's thoughtless and it's reckless, but they're not intending any harm. So it's this idea that it's a calculated risk. But this calculated risk obviously is stacked in his favour because he's in a car and she's, they are on a bike. Now, if I wanted to develop that into an even more detailed and hopefully perceptive comment, I could add some more details from the source that suggest that this happens a lot. And we're talking about commuting in London, we're talking about people getting home safely. So it's almost like there's this culture of commuters taking these kinds of risks in congested traffic. So I'm going to go with, it seems that this risky behaviour is appallingly common amongst commuters eager to get home, who perhaps are thoughtless rather than malicious. Which would be a nice link to talking about source B. So in source B, there is similar behaviour where drivers intentionally, so in source B, there is similar behaviour where drivers intentionally target cyclists passing so close, which is equally irresponsible. Now I'm trying throughout my answer to make these links to show that I'm talking about similarities. And I'm not just talking about similarities between stuff. I'm not just saying in both the behaviour is risky. I'm making inferences about that risky behaviour. I'm talking about how it's irresponsible, how some of it is thoughtless rather than malicious. And this is a comparison to the drivers in source B where it's irresponsible. You don't just want to be linking details and saying that it's a similarity, because that will be a band 1, a level 1 response. You'll get 1 or 2 marks. So if you were to say, I mean, it's both about overtaking, isn't it? If you were to say in both sources the drivers overtake badly, in source A they overtake my bike closely, and in source B they chase the lady on their bike, which is also bad, then you are talking about similarities, but not in a developed or thoughtful way. So that would be a very simple response, and we're aiming for something that's much more developed and detailed than that, something that's got more inferences in. So I need to carry on this to complete my comparison here. So in source B, there is similar behaviour where drivers intentionally target cyclists passing so close, which is equally irresponsible. But I'm going to develop this by talking about how they are malicious and they're targeting her as a woman. So their behaviour is immoral, as they are chasing the lady in a planned way. The source states they get enjoyment out of it, doesn't it? So the source, they are fond, very fond of cutting just in front of you. So they're fond of cutting in or deliberately checking you at the crossroads. Which suggests that they're targeting her, they're targeting women on bikes. They're targeting women on bikes specifically for enjoyment, rather than to save time in their commute. As in source A. So that would be my fully developed, my fully explained first point of comparison. Like with the question 3 response, what I've got there is something that is very detailed. I've kept coming back to this same idea. So I've hopefully developed it in enough detail and with enough perceptive comments for it to be a level 4 response. If I were to do that again, I would hopefully be getting 8 marks out of 8 here. If I just did that, because it is a detailed response, because it is perceptive, I should still get 7 marks out of 8. If you were to develop 2 points in maybe not so much detail, but still in a way that was clear, then you would be looking at 5 or 6 marks out of 8, which is a really solid mark for this question. So if you haven't done so already, pause the video now and have a go at writing your own response to question 2.